Wednesday is traditionally our audio day for our second hour, and today is no exception. Jeff Francis, what are we discussing in Audio Hour today?
So I thought we'd talk today about what I call mix prep or mix preparation. And this is something that happens in a mix no matter what, but I think it's actually smart to think about it as its own individual task. There was all that research back in who knows when, 70s, 60s, about the left brain and the right brain and the logic analytical side and the creative side. And I think a lot of that's bunk, but the idea of actually like looking at tasks as an analytical side and a creative side is really important. So the mix prep is the analytical cleanup side to mix, getting your tracks prepared for mixing. I'm going to be talking more from definitely more from a music perspective, but we probably want to think about this from a mix post perspective and also talk about it from podcasts and all those sorts of things. So stuff that I see going into mix prep, there we go, is organizing your session. Naming tracks, organizing things in buses and folders, coloring tracks so it's easy to find things, putting in markers, all those sorts of things. General cleanup, so that's noise removal, that is muting things that aren't needed, taking out pops, all those kinds of things. Certainly in music, we do a lot of comping. That's what we call it in music. That's compiling a performance from multiple takes. That happens in dialogue editing. So that's the editing portion of stuff, musical editing. In music, we do a lot of fixing of timing, especially if you get, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a lot of music that's been created by people who were not together musicians playing in the same room. They were all recording to a track and pieces were put on top of other pieces. And so everybody feels the click track or the basic track differently. And so oftentimes timing needs to be aligned. People are supposed to be together. And even when musicians play, sometimes we just don't have enough time to do another take. And so we can use a little bit of editing to fix timing. And then the last thing is we oftentimes adjust tuning, intonation of things, especially in music. Sometimes I would say a little too much, but we can fight that battle out. So that's kind of where I want to start thinking about this. And I'm happy for everyone else to jump in and talk about this. But, so in the organization thing, are your tracks all named properly? Do they have things that make sense? So this is often a thing where sessions get handed off from one person to another, from an editor to a mixer. And so the final stage, either of the editor or the mixer needs to do this before they can even begin mixing, is to do this mix prep stage and getting things organized. So naming your tracks so we can find things, organizing tracks into folders. So if I take a look here, there you see a big session. So this is in Pro Tools, but there's a whole bunch of tracks here. And these are handed to me as basically not really stems, but they are completely consolidated. So you see there's absolutely no editing in here. There's no editing been done, but I have a whole slew of tracks and they're named all kinds of things: acoustic guitar, AL guitar 1, AL guitar 2, bass, click. And I've highlighted the ones that to me seem like they are part of a drum set. So we have crash, we have hat, that's hi-hat, we have kick drum, ride, snare, toms. And I can take all of those and I can move all of those to a folder. So I'm going to create a new folder, and what do you think I'm going to call that? I'm going to call that drums. And at least in Pro Tools, we have two kinds of folders. One is just an organizational thing, and the other one is an organizational folder that also includes routing. So this is going to create a new bus that is a drum bus, and is going to put all of those. And now it's moved all of those into their own folder, and I can very neatly take that drum folder and open and close it. And we can see that in both views, that the drums here are collapsed, and then I can open up that drum folder and there's all of our drum tracks. And just that kind of simple organization, doing that with each component of the thing. So I'll take all my acoustic guitars and put them together, take all my electric guitars and put them together, take my background vocals, put them together. And that way I can get this session much more organized. Whether I'm handing this off to a mixer, if I hand it off to a mixer, then when he opens this up, he's not going to miss something. Oh, there was this electric guitar lick, but, it was called Audio 3. And that was the main hook in the pre-chorus, and you muted it. Well, he's like, I don't know. It was just called Audio 3. What was I supposed to do with that? Same kind of thing can be really handy to put some colors on this. So maybe I like my drums. I don't know. What color are drums?
Tan for the high.
Purple, man, always purple.
Purple drums.
They're
okay.
loud colors.
See, I knew Chris couldn't have an answer because every audio engineer's got their
Dark
answer. So
purple, always
purple. Our drums are purple. Okay, what color's bass, Chris?
blue.
Yeah, I'm also a blue bass.
Yep, yeah, I do all the way top right on that bad boy.
Top right. You like that color.
And then if you
All
go
right,
3 spaces over, those are my vocals, that bright blue.
All right, so I'm going to put drums at the very beginning of the session and then bass, right? And we're going to move on. We're going to organize. You're not going to sit and watch me do this whole thing right now, but there will definitely be color. And then when you come into that session, it's visually easy to find things. So track colors are really good. The routing that we've talked about, I'll set up sends for reverbs, sends for delays, all kinds of typical things we might use. The routing folders that I put this in, I've already got a drum submix. So that's already there. And then the last thing is probably, if you look, I've got listed here a bunch of markers. So that's the intro, verse 1, pre-chorus, chorus, solo 1, verse 2. I can immediately jump to all the locations, and it just makes the mix process. Now, I don't have to think. I don't have to use my analytical brain. I can be creative because I can jump to where I want to go. I can find the tracks I need. So that's kind of the organization, the first stage of it. And we've got a couple of stages to talk about it, but I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in about the organization side of things.
Chris Kellen's next on the list. Chris, you want to talk a little bit about this?
First off, just a standing ovation for everything that Jeff just said, because like 1,000%. But yeah, this is like, there's so much to talk about this. And mix prep, and just very much there's a creative aspect to this, and then there's an analytical aspect to this. And for me, I have both in live settings and in studio settings, I have like a complete template that is fully set up for me, that I can load, that is just a blank. It's a blank slate for me with every tool that I'm gonna want. And my approach with that is not like, hey, this is a paint by numbers, I send this to there and it's just done. It has all of my options that I know I'm going to want. It's got a ton of different effects. I've got, a bunch of different reverbs, delays. I have buses. I have parallel buses for compression. Just kind of any type of tool that I want quick access to, because I kind of end up using the same concepts for shaping, even though, because that's, what my brain tells me is the route I want to take. And so it's kind of anything I know I'm going to create every song. I don't want to have to do that. It's just out of laziness, I guess. You want it just done then, and you want it ready to go, because I don't want to be setting up my session. Even when with my template already fully built, sometimes it takes me longer just to get my template all like actually routed and get everything set up. I have an analog situation as well happening, and so I have my pathways. So everything when I'm mixing, which primarily is music, it's all mixed within the computer. This is all in the box, right? So I've got all my busing, I have all of this stuff, my groups, my processing, my effects is all happening. Then it is spit out here, it is summed, I have some analog processing, and it's brought back in. But these templates that are set up, all of that, my template already has my drums routed to my Neve in the channels that I want, and my vocals where I want. So all I have to do when I'm working, someone sends me a song, I get everything color coded. I get it organized the way I want. I actually don't use folders because it's kind of an extra step for me. I have a mixing surface that I use, and so for me, what I'm actually using is I'm using a combination of VCAs, which are voltage control amplifiers, which really should be DCAs, digitally controlled amplifiers, because no voltage is going through Pro Tools. I use those, and then I use a whole myriad of groups and just effects buses and things like that. So I can grab any individual piece of I can grab my snare drum, I can grab just my kick and my snare, I can grab all of my drums, I can, whatever layer of instrumentation I need to affect, I can grab really, really quickly, and it's all just built into my template. That stuff isn't creative. I know it has to get here, and I don't want to have to set that up every time. So that is my approach, and it's really just about time savers and utility.
Courtney, your thoughts?
Well, I'm just going to take a little right turn here from music mixing to another form of mixing, which is mixing sound, re-recording for motion pictures or television. So we want to take that into consideration. I don't know if you want to move me to last or something, but if other people are going to be talking about music. But track preparation is also an essential part of doing re-recording or a final mix for a motion picture or a television show. Usually you're going to mix down to stems, what's called stems. You have dialogue, music, and effects, and sometimes you'll have surrounds or specialty set of stems. So you want to prep your tracks and group them together, like all the dialogue tracks need to be grouped together, and the tracks need to be named by the character name so that you know when someone's speaking on screen that if they're a little too loud, you can grab the Fred fader and bring them down a little bit. A lot of times they will pre-mix the music into stereo pair or Atmos, and you'll go into the final mix with the pre-mixed music. So the music director or the composer will sit and pre-mix all the music to the way that they like it, but they'll have all the individual tracks there necessarily dragging along in sync to time code. So in the final mix, if they do want to tweak it a little bit, they can. But you want to have them divided up. And a lot of times, in many situations, there are actually 3 different mixers that are operating. One mixes the dialogue, one mixes the music, and one mixes the effects, sound effects. So they're each sitting at their own little panel and can control the balance between the actors, let's say, or the balance of the sound effects. A lot of times you'll get into a mix and they'll say, hey, the Foley guys missed that effect, and so you'll have to go back to the sound effects library and you'll have to fly something in on a separate track for that sound effect, synchronize it to the picture and make sure it syncs up and add that in the mix. So you have to be prepared for flying stuff in at the last minute. You have to be prepared with groups. And you can premix. A lot of times they will also premix dialogue, especially on a scene-by-scene basis. So it's a little easier to deal with rather than trying to deal with 150 to 200 tracks in the final mix. You're just dealing with maybe 20 or 30 tracks instead of that myriad of tracks. And of course, with mixing to picture, you have the additional problem of making sure everything's in sync. So a lot of times you'll have to keep all those tracks separate because something will have been cut out of sync, or maybe they laid in a line from take 2 over take 1 because they like the look of take 1 better, but they like their reading in take 2 better, so they kind of flew take 2's sound in there, and it may not match up correctly. So those are some considerations there.
We've got a lot of people weighing in on this. Also, I know that Jeff prepared a couple of things, so I'm going to let's do one audience question now, then I'm going to come back to Jeff, then we're going to take some more people on the panel. So one audience question now. Courtney?
All right. First audience question comes in from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, what would a mix engineer expect when mixing a track not created in their own room?
Chris, you want to help him out? Jeff, I'm sorry. I punched. Let's reverse the order. Jeff, do you do it first, and then Chris.
Go for it.
Yeah, we both jumped in there at the last minute. They're not going to know how it's going to arrive, whether it's been organized or they need to do all this. And some big mix engineers will actually employ an assistant engineer that does all of this work ahead of time to get it into their situation the way they want. Also, if it's not been they don't know the room it is, so there may be all kinds of acoustic anomalies in the tracks based on where it was recorded. Was it recorded in a professional studio that had good acoustics, or was it recorded in, somebody's bedroom and there's all kinds of terrible, ring from untreated walls and untreated ceiling. Ceiling height gives a nice bump. Standard ceiling height gives a nice bump at about 125 hertz, because that's where the rooms like to ring, that 8-foot ceiling. So all of those things that a mix engineer is going to open this session up, and we hope we could get to a point where if the person is just a mix engineer, that when they open it up, it's a beautifully organized session and not a mess. Go ahead, Chris.
Chris, you want to add something?
Yeah. I mean, it really just depends. I get things sent to me in just a ton of different variety and forms. So one, if they're using the same software that I use, which is Pro Tools, I always have them send me the actual session. Anybody who's working with outside engineers, a really great thing about being able to send your session is you're not actually printing out and bouncing. There's no conversion happening to those files before they're handed off. Your engineer gets to like really access the raw recordings. So that's always the just the highest quality way to get your tracks off to somebody. But frequently I have someone just sending, maybe they're using Logic or, another DAW, and they're just sending me WAV files. That's totally fine. It really depends. Some folks are super organized, some are not. And I would just encourage everyone, this is a learning experience for everybody. And really at the point that you really start organizing your workflow, because mix prep is incredibly important, but also it's like, what happens with the song after? What about archive? What about all these other things? And it's really this full streamlined workflow that when you get it all in place, these projects, they come in as whatever they are, and you quickly are able to conform them into whatever your world does. And that's the whole point to me of the prep and all these workflows.
Craig Kadoki, before we broke away, you had your hand raised. What are your thoughts?
I was just going to echo some of the naming comments about naming files and stuff, and add in the other paperwork, and whether it's actual paperwork or whether it's metadata that's included in the file. The signal chain of the recording, excuse me, if I'm doing a recording that I'm giving the files to somebody else, I try to give them as much information about what mic was used, the gain settings, if it was going through an interface that Pro Tools or Logic, in my case, doesn't control directly. Anything else that was in that pathway that will help them understand what the track is, but also if something has to be edited or dropped in later, if somebody has to come back and re-record a section of it, then they've got that metadata. They understand, like, again, what mic it was, the pattern, gain staging, signal path.
Let's go to the next question.
All righty. Next question comes in from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. Kind of a throwback question. He says, in my day, prep included cleaning heads on machines and having enough tape labels and Sharpies on hand. Are there similar steps for preparing a digital audio workstation or monitor tuning, and such as monitor tuning?
Jeff Francis.
So I think Craig was covering some of that with the metadata and the archive. So not only did we have to clean heads on tape machines, but we had to align tape machines. And anyone who's done that probably is very happy they don't have to do that anymore. But I think having adequate storage, adequate backup. Remember, if nothing else, if you remember nothing else about backup and archive, 3-2-1, 3 versions, 2 different types of media, 1 off-site. So make sure that your media, all of your files and everything. And then as you go through, I like to do mix versionings. So as I'm working on a session, whether it's editing the mix prep stage and the mix stage, I will save copies of the session, because the session itself doesn't include the media. So the media needs to be backed up, but the session I can save. It's a fairly small file, and I will usually save that in revision numbers. Personally, I like to do, we never use the word final. There's just a big joke about final, very final, absolutely this is the final. No, I use revision numbers, and what I do is I use a numbering and lettering system. So I use numbers. So the first edit is edit 1, and as I work, every time I save, I do edit 1A, edit 1B, and that could be when I've done a few hours of work, when I take a lunch break, when the next day I come back, whenever I've done enough that I can always step back to that. And then when I send it to the client, if it's, edit 1G, when they come back with the revisions, when the work starts again on their revisions, that's edit 2A. because now the client has seen a version of 1, and now we're working on version 2, and I've gotten client comments back on that.
Great. Let's ping to Chris Gellen.
Yeah. So it just totally depends. I'm assuming that your question is really based on in a studio setting. So in that, I mean, you said a prep day. So if I'm doing an actual session, prepping for a session is not the same as prepping for a mix, obviously. So it just really depends on what the task is at hand. As far as prepping for mixing and getting things all that ready, yes, you're absolutely going through, you're relabeling things, you're color coding, just as we said, and you want to get things organized in the exact same way that you were getting things organized in an analog setting. This is all the same thing, guys. So it really is. So it's a sound source is coming in, right? It's going to be on a channel, whether or not that's analog or digital. This is just how it works. So it's really the same kind of approach. It's just honestly, you have way more options in a digital realm than you do in an analog realm, because you just do. So there's that. And as far as just piggybacking off what Jeff said, I do mix numbers, I do version numbers for myself, and revision numbers for clients. So that way, because I may be doing I may save 10 different versions of a song, just trying 10 different little quick ideas I want to be able to snap back and forth to show a client. Maybe they're coming to the studio and I can say, hey, here's a couple different concepts. I don't want to have to redraw things then with them in the room. I mean, it just depends. But the version numbers for myself, I can have a million version numbers for myself and still keep them just at mix 1, rev 2 or whatever, and that way you can easily get back to your session. And I would tell people, as you're doing these, make sure that you're relabeling your actual session name correct with the file name that you're sending out, because when you have to go back and find stuff, it makes it really, really straightforward. Hey, this is labeled, mix 1 rev 3. It's done. So
We're going to go back to Jeff Francis for a little more content here. Jeff, dive in.
So next thing is cleanup, but I'm sure there's going to be 2 things we're going to pull out of here that we're going to talk about. So we're going to do noise removal, and that can be either via editing or some kind of noise removal tool. I threw up Isotope RX because it's one I love. Certainly, if we have a dialogue editor here, they're going to spend a lot of time in Isotope RX prepping dialogue. I love to mute things that are unused, and that what I'm talking about there is actually muting the region rather than muting the track, because it's very easy to unmute all the tracks, but if I actually mute the region, whoops. Yeah, let's go, sorry about that. Where's my Pro Tools session? There you are. So you can see the session here. I've taken a little bit of time. I've color coded. I've got, guitars all here and a guitar. And if I decide that this little part of this guitar is not needed, I can separate that out and I can mute that, and you can see that region is grayed out. So the audio is still there, but now that will never play. So it's there, the mix engineer can have it and they can use that, but that's not going to be heard unless they decide to make it, even if they unmute all the tracks. Also adjusting levels. I'm not a fan of the raw normalization. So normalization takes a piece of audio and finds its peak, and if the peak is minus 3.5, it'll put 3.5 dB of gain on the whole thing. But I will manually go in and adjust the gain of tracks or individual parts of tracks. So if someone has punched in on a track and one part of the vocal is much louder than another part of the vocal, I'll go in and adjust that in the mix prep stage, so that, most importantly, everything on a track that is supposed to be the same instrument hits the first dynamics processor at the same level. So if you had a bass punch in on the bridge and you have a bass compressor, and the bridge recording is louder than the chorus recording, it's going to compress differently. So if we adjust that in the clip gain rather than on the fader, then that adjustment will allow that to hit the compressor the same.
Nice. Marty, you had something you wanted to weigh in on?
Yeah, I wanted to stress one of the most important parts of mixing prep, and one of the things that can really screw up a mixing engineer is the recording prep itself. To really streamline the process of mixing, you want to have your recording as organized as possible. And this goes back to what Craig was talking about earlier with not only metadata. Metadata is very important because those are the notes that give us information about the track and how it was recorded. But then organizing the tracks, naming the tracks, making sure that the gains the tracks are coming from. If you're recording, say, live from a mixer, those tracks are being recorded right off the preamp. So preamp gain settings are extremely important. Organizing the tracks in an order, making sure that the tracks are named. Not only the track is named, but each of the takes in the track. So a track can have multiple clips in it from multiple recordings. Each one of those can have a name. That name could be the person, the instrument, the take in notes or something. You can put anything in there that you need to put in there. And having that organized and well documented is really going to go a long way towards streamlining the mix process and avoiding confusion when the mix is going to somebody who didn't record it. They've first got to figure out what they're looking at and what they have to work with.
Chris Kellen, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. I would just really everything that was just said, full on agree. I would 90% of the outcome of your project is in how it's recorded. So people should really, really, when they are approaching their first project and actually dealing with the capture phase of all this, realize there isn't, yes, sort of, there's fixing it later, but not if you want it to be the outcome that you where it's actually like everything is perfect. That doesn't get fixed later. That gets fixed then at that moment. Whether it's a live show and your instrumentation needs to be tweaked and corrected so it doesn't sound horrible all night, or it's not a thing you're fighting all night. All these things. If you're recording drums before you're thinking about microphones, listen to the drum kit. Does it sound amazing? If not, fix that and then approach it with mics. So, and you can take that to any kind of speaking situation or whatever it is. So I would just encourage people, definitely, again, however you capture this, that is the full potential of your project. It really is. And also, just discussions like this are really incredible because they really illuminate how just the diversity of everybody's musical approaches. To me, I'll say, like, a lot of what's being said here, I consider actually being the mixing stage itself. And so it's just in approach of what you're doing. For me, it's usually more about setting up the blank slate so I can then go in and do whatever I need and have a quick tool for that. And I kind of consider that all mixing, but I don't know. This is awesome hearing everybody's choices and approaches here. So.
Marty, you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, so just to give a practical example of how things could go seriously wrong, and why it's important to think in advance about organization. And here's a practical example. I'm going to be doing an event in a couple of weeks, an event that I've done before, and this is a news organization that is staging a sort of a festival, and we're going to be in a theater, and we're going to be doing a series of interviews. And each interview will have between 2 and 5 microphones. And we're going to have a minimum of 8 microphones available. They're all wireless microphones. And I'm going to be multi-tracking this, so every microphone will have its own track. However, and I'll know pretty much in advance who is going to be where, because I'll have the entire script and the run of show, and I will pre-assign microphones to each person in each interview to make sure that when I'm doing one interview, we're using one set of microphones. The next interview, we'll be using a completely different set of microphones, and a lot of them will be lavaliers, and they will be prepared in advance before they go on. But the trick is that these interviews will happen in rapid fire motion. When the first interview is done, people are walking off stage. The announcer in the room is already announcing the next one who is walking on stage. That gives me a minimum amount of time to be changing what's being recorded in the multitrack. So I will disarm the tracks from the prior interview and then arm the tracks for the next interview. I will not have time to close the recording, open a new recording, and rearming tracks. So the one session will have multiple interviews with different microphones for each session. That can get really, really dicey when you go to open those up and what's where, when did this interview happen, when did this person speak. Pre-planning is really important.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next question.
Next question comes in from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And he says, what ADR-like tools are there for multiple recordings or takes of solos that are to be added to the final mix? Do they generate clicks based on tempo, or do you not use clicks with a soloist?
Jeff Francis, you said this was part and parcel to your presentation for the next section, so let's do that.
I don't know if Chris wanted to jump in first because he had his hand raised.
He did.
Go for it.
Tried to reverse the other, but figure we'll just get through it all. I'm coming to Chris
I knew Chris was going to mention playlists, right? So when we're recording,
yes, that's what I was going to say.
And Chris, raise your hand
Chris,
again.
tell us what playlists are.
Go for it.
So playlists are a way to record multiple takes, multiple options on one track. Only one of those can play at a time. And so as long as there is and they are recorded in the same time, so according to some backing track. So here you see this crazy session, and if I open up this oboe track to show the playlist that went into it, you can see there were many, many, many takes of oboe along with a backing track. So there's 94 different takes of oboe, and those were composited, and we say comping, by taking individual portions of that. So you can see that this purple track down here was edited up into this, and then additional editing was done. So this composite oboe track is comprised of all of those individual portions of that. So this was recorded into playlists. This person played along with a backing track, 84 different times in different sections of the piece, and then that was compiled. And once that editing is done, we can kind of forget that portion of it. That's, again, the mix prep is that editing. And now when the mix engineer comes into this, they don't need to worry about all those other things. They're still there if they want them. They can go and find those takes if they need to fix something. But that way, the prep portion of compositing, doing this comping, and this is done all the time. Vocals, guitar solos, drum tracks, whatever it is, we do compositing. So to answer Roscoe's question, that's kind of what we're dealing with there. Do they generate clicks based on tempos? We're using usually a click track or some kind of backing track. So whether that is just purely a metronome style click, whether that is a drum loop, whether that's a full MIDI mock-up of the piece where we have, in this case, a MIDI oboe that the oboe player would play along with, all of those are options. But yes, they are listening to that, and those are their cues of where their timing goes.
Chris Jillin.
Yeah, Jeff just nailed that. So pretty much all of that. And then I would just say that pretty much like most DAWs will allow some kind of loop record function. These tracks are also just called virtual tracks. So if you're ever hearing a virtual track, it is just sub layers where you can only play one track of your choice off that channel, but you may have, 50 different versions of whatever. So you can group, your 15 drum mics together, let's say, into a group, and you can do batches of recordings, right? Where it will just keep pulling up those in a group fully new, and you can just keep doing your pass. It will flip, you do your pass, and that way you can end up with a bunch of different versions of things. And I have this happening all the time, where your player has done a bunch of different just choices, right? Hey, do I like this kind of a fill? Do I like this, whatever? And you can go through these different options and see what they actually played at that moment. And you can really, really get these brilliant parts and pieces together that really, really build a brilliant arrangement or just achieve whatever goal you're looking for. So.
Courtney, you want to address the movie side?
Yeah, I was just going to ask our talented music mixers here if about situations for flying in, let's say, flying in a replacement solo track, like he was asking about in the mix. And if it's a freeform jazz, maybe you don't have a click track. I don't know if they do or don't. If it's kind of a freeform progressive jazz type. But if you have to hit a downbeat, if the person's coming in with this solo that you're going to replace something that's there, if they hear it, maybe it's too late to hit that downbeat precisely. Do you ever show them an output of the console showing the scrolling waveform so that they can see the waveform coming up of that existing solo that they're going to replace the downbeat of, so they can hit it right on the mark?
Jeff Francis, you have a thought, or then I'll go to Chris.
Yeah. So in that case, I will sometimes just back time some clicks. So I'll get 4 or 8 clicks in the right tempo and just line that up for where it is. So if something that's free form, I do a lot of classical music recording and mixing, and that is not done to a click. And so there's no headphones, nothing. They'll do 84 takes of a piece. And the editing for that, so we don't record in playlists then, because we're just recording linearly down the timeline, and then I will edit all of the microphones together, and we're not doing overdubbing. But if we're doing overdubbing like you're talking about and they need to hit a downbeat, I will just back time a click. And that may be actual metronome. That could be, some cymbal hits that I find from somewhere else, as long as it's in the tempo and gives them the idea of where they need to be.
Let's see. Chris, Gillen.
Yeah, I would just say that, most of the infrastructure for that situation is already set up. If they're recording to a click and doing all that, they're just redoing the solo. So there's not really a whole lot of extra steps because that infrastructure is already going. They're already hearing a click and they're already comfortable and hopefully having a good time recording. But in that kind of situation, you're just muting the solo and you're giving them some pre-roll. So they can just have as many tries, or you can do a loop record function that will really just highlight that section and keep going and keep spitting those solos into virtual tracks on that. So you can really go through, you can find what you want, and then you can pull those pieces up to the top. And you can also, if you have processing on those tracks, it's really nice because in a virtual setting, as you're pulling up let's say, hey, between these two vocals and you have a comp set already, hey, those vocals were done at 2 minutes away from each other, and it's all the same settings, so they're gonna fit into the song in a really similar way, and you can really look at your parts evenly that way. So
I think we're going to the next question, so let's do the next question, and then if Jeff has more content, we'll go back to him.
All righty then. Douglas Carmichael has a question. He says, especially in electronic music, the lines have been blurred between tracking and mixing. Do you think the unification can be detrimental to the creative process?
Philosophical questions. Jeff Francis, start us off.
And my philosophical answer will be it depends. I think it depends on the person. Some people, that's their workflow, and that's how they like to be creative, is they don't want to commit all these decisions. They're in the middle of the mix. They're going to come up and be like, oh, I need this other sound. I need this other melody, whatever it is. So that's perfectly fine if it works for you.
And Chris?
No, I think it really just kind of, it opens possibility and potential, right? So to me, the actual formula, you would say, for mixing electronic or building electronic versus building tracks with an actual band playing instrumentation, like, standard guitars and stuff, it's pretty much the same, because most of the electronic stuff, it's happening on samplers, it's happening on keyboards, it's happening on synths. This is all right. You're going to find these elements in most songs anyways. It might just be a little bit more focused on that. Really, in the mix phase, the biggest difference in that is that you're not dealing with most of the issues you deal with in most acoustically recorded audio, because you're dealing with situations. Again, okay, this is a synthetic drum. Unless it's programmed to get louder and quieter, it's exactly the same. It doesn't need a compressor. right? It's never going to get different than what it is. So when you think of these things, really understand what they're doing and then see if it even needs a tool, if it even needs a job done to it, because it might just be already facilitating where it has to go. And that extra step might kill where it was going to be. So,
Jeff Francis, I understand we got another topic up.
Let me unmute here. So I want to talk about two things, adjusting, fixing, timing. So we will musically align things in the editing process. There are tools that actually do, so editing we're manually moving things around. And then we can also use time compression and expansion to stretch or squeeze the audio. Pro Tools calls it elastic audio. There's other names for other DAWs. If you've got MIDI things, we have MIDI quantization. And then we also will adjust tuning. So the two biggies are Atari's Auto-Tune and Celemony Melodyne. Melodyne will also do, and that's what I use. I don't know if Antares does this as well, but they do adjustment of tuning and timing. So doing this, we're trying to create better performances than we have. Oftentimes people go a little to the extreme. And that's a judgment call about whether you've overused the tool and you've let it push things. So when I'm adjusting timing, I'm not trying to make everything perfect. I'm just trying to make it a little closer to better. And I'm not trying to make the intonation exactly on the pitch. Just when I hear things that are out, I want to pull them in. So years ago, the Remotes, if you remember our wonderful Office Hours Remotes band, we did several songs. One of those was a song, Leave It. And Leave It had, I think we had 35 tracks of vocals in total, which were recorded by people all around the globe, Australia, Norway, US, Canada, all over the place. And those tracks, everybody recorded to a MIDI guide, and so everybody felt the MIDI track differently, so we had to align the timings, especially the endings of vocals, and then a lot of tuning stuff, because we had multiple harmonies. So what I'm going to play, the back end's going to play here in just a moment, is a video that shows, and these are not fully mixed, this was in the mix prep process, but basically I did tuning and timing on these vocals, and then printed it with before and after, so you'll hear the pre-vocals and then the post vocals after I've adjusted the tuning and the timing of these. So if the back end can play that video now, that would be awesome.
Goodbye, 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 bye. Hello, hello, heaven. Goodbye, 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 bye. Hello, hello, heaven.
Bit of a difference there.
Bit of a difference. So, that shows you, and that's, those vocals were not isolated. They were part of a greater mix, drums, bass, lead vocals, all kinds of other things going on. One of the things I found was I was paying real good attention to the thirds of the chords, because the thirds of the chords shouldn't be perfectly in tune. They should be perfectly in tune, but if they're perfectly in tune, they don't read perfectly in tune according to equal temperament. Our tuning system takes all the mistakes and spreads them out equally between 12 keys, the 12 notes. But if you have a major chord amongst voices, especially if they're a cappella voices, or in this case, in this song, we actually had it doubled by a string quartet, thanks to our own Todd Reynolds. We could actually make those chords, those major chords, be in tune with themselves by pulling the third to where it should be. And same thing with the minor chords. I was paying really good attention to those. I couldn't leave Melodyne to put things directly on the technical in-tune note, because the technical in-tune note was not just intonation. It was equal temperament.
So there's a lot of subtlety in this. Courtney, do you have a thought about something you want to talk about? Oops.
Sorry, excuse the glitch. It comes and goes. It won't happen for another 15 minutes. I was going to ask Jeff, on that last segment we heard where the pre-tuned up and then the tuned up section, I'm only listening in one ear, but maybe it's a function of that. But on the tuned up, I seem to hear a little more comb filtering or not. Do you have to take care that when you're tuning things up, that you have to tune them up to a point where they're mixed together, that they're not going to just slightly be off, a half a cycle, and comb filter and cause kind of a swimming comb filtering effect?
Yeah, especially that one, because the top voice stays on the same note, and the other note, the other voices start on in unison and then drop away from that. So you actually have a lot of voices on I think that was a D or a G there. Don't have perfect pitch, so don't ask me. But that was a definite troublesome spot. In the mix, that wasn't a problem because of the other things that were going on there. But in isolation, I still hear that too. That first unison, it's not a perfect unison. However, when I made it a perfect unison, it sounded really artificial, because you never get four people to actually sing that tight together.
Interesting. Marty, you got a comment?
Yeah, so I've had to do timing adjustments on choirs and such, and duals and triplets, trios, and when they're, as we just heard from these, and these were stereo tracks, when they're not timed, it's just, when it is timed, it really comes into focus, and it really comes into a melded, homogeneous sound. And when it was before timing, it just sounded very dispersed. It's like, every hammer in a piano, on a piano key, every note hits 3 strings. And so imagine hitting those 3 strings manually with 3 different hammers, or hitting them at the same time. And that kind of illustrates the difference. Melodyne is gold. Another tool that's really, really good that I've used is Vocaline from Synchro Arts. And that has really helped me to bring instruments and vocals into time alignment so that the initial transients line up, or you can offset them manually if you want to, as well as the waveforms that follow. So as Courtney was saying, having the waveforms line up properly prevents phase anomalies. And these tools are valuable tools, can really help.
Jeff Francis, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, we can really do some amazing things. I think we need to remember that as we're doing this, we need to be careful not to go too far to suck the human out of things. This was the remotes. We're dealing with a lot of amateur musicians, and all recording, holding an SM58 standing in their closet or something. This is not a professional studio recording, but people were doing their best as far as pitch, but then we're trying to help align all of that. We weren't a choir standing in a room with a conductor who can cue the cutoffs. So cutoffs of things needed to be edited to keep everybody together, especially ending their phrases. It's amazing to go back and listen to old recordings that we love from the pre-tuning days where musicians actually just played things. And they played things, and if they needed to play them again, they didn't get an undo key. They didn't get the option of playlists. It was like you did a guitar solo and you either did another one and say, I can play a better guitar solo because I'm going to erase the previous guitar solo by recording over it. So I need to make a better guitar solo. So people were better rehearsed. I actually had a student bring in a recording, and the raw vocal of this vocalist who had grown up listening to heavily auto-tuned music, his phrasing of his transitions between notes sounded like the artifacts of tuning software. And that is how he had learned to sing, because he'd grown up listening to songs where the vocal was overly tuned and there was artifacts in the transition, because that's the genre of music he listened to, and he had trained his singing, and he actually made that affect in his voice as he sang. It was the strangest thing I have ever heard.
I actually heard somebody try to sing like Cher on Believe with the auto-tune popping back and forth and pulled it off. So that's interesting. Chris Kellen, you had another thing?
Yeah, I would just encourage people to kind of like when you're looking at timing and timing correction within mixing and prep and all that. To me, it really just affects the momentum of the song. And so if you kind of look at it as, a bumpy road with potholes versus a nicely paved, fresh road of highway, whatever, where you can really, really feel that smooth when in your ears and to just your psyche when you're listening to music and you're having these things kind of bouncing off of each other at the wrong times, they can really, really add just big interruptions in your comfort level of listening to things. Okay, so one big thing that I've noticed in my years of mixing is that really embracing time correction and just working with musicians to make sure that timing is really, really, that it is as paramount as it actually is that when I end up going through and doing this, all of my other mixing choices just become better because all of a sudden the space, right? Things aren't overlapping at the wrong time, potentially like making a bunchiness of two separate instruments kind of banging up against each other. Things like that, you really, really get this ease of listening. And so that's what that feeling is if you're not hearing that in your music, that really, really do look at your timing because it is so important.
Let's go to our next question.
Next one comes in from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. And he asked, when mixing with dialogue, do you EQ as soon as you lay down any non-dialogue tracks to punch a hole for the dialogue? Or do you wait until the music muddies the dialogue? Yes, the problem of ditched dialogue in today's movie.
Chris Gillin.
I would try to not assume that things are going to get bad as soon as you add things, because it's not a very healthy approach in this. I would more try and streamline everything, all of your elements into the situation, and don't do anything until you have all of your parts in there and you can really actually see how they're interacting with each other. If music is muddying something up, that music probably needs to be corrected. It's not that you have music and so now it's muddy. That was just muddy music, right? So you want to kind of like understand these distinctions and get usually if you have dialogue and you have music under it, you want to make sure that the music is not so loud that it is swallowing and covering up the dialogue. You want to really understand that that the low end of a voice, with that chiseled out a little bit and sculpted, it can really separate the vocal from low end features like bass lines and things that can be in the musical programming of that. And I would just kind of try and understand that there is a balance that you're trying to achieve. It's the vocal. The music is the after effect of that, and you would try and just make sure your main source is always highlighted. So,
Marty Atias.
Yeah, so this is an important aspect of pre-planning between the producer and the engineer and the composers of music and sound effects. The concept of muddying, right, in this context is related to masking, frequency masking. So what that is if you have a vocal dialogue and you've got music, there are common bands of frequencies that will appear in both, and they can one can mask the other, and the difference in volume and different level is really critical. So one of the techniques is what we call frequency sculpting, where you actually take the bed, the music or the sound effect, and you kind of duck or reduce those frequencies that are contained in the voice to make space for the voice from the bed. But there's also other ways to deal with that by stereo or surround sound placement. So if you have music tracks coming from a different direction than the center voice channel, that's a way of making space. So it's a different kind of space that, within your tracks. And again, this is all done in pre-planning, envisioning on how the audio for the piece is going to go.
Courtney.
And if you're Christopher Nolan, you don't equalize the audio tracks at all. You let them come in muddy with all the low end still there. And you mix it under the music, just about 10 dB below the music. So everyone's going, what did he say in the movie theater? I couldn't
Keeps
hear.
you engaged.
I didn't hear what he said.
What
What did that guy say? Yeah, it's typically in motion pictures they would equalize the dialogue tracks, emphasizing the 5 to 10,000, 5 to 8,000, 3 to 8,000 hertz area. Give it a little boost in there to increase its intelligibility. It's especially true in older movies. They had the Academy filter, which was run through, which they were having to filter the soundtracks with the idea that they're going to end up on an optical motion picture soundtrack, which has a fairly limited frequency response. So for intelligibility, they had a frequency curve, kind of like the RIAA curve as in music for dialogue. And but they're not doing that. Everything is now full frequency response, 20 to 20,000. And if you go into your final mix with all those frequencies available, a lot of times, as was mentioned by Marty, you're going to get masking that happens in there. And if you mix the sound effects too loud or you mix the music a little too loud, a lot of times the dialogue will get lost unless it's punched up bidirectionality.
Let's go to our next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada says, do mix engineers need a knowledge of mastering in order to get the best out of the final release?
Chris Jillin.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very helpful thing. I mean, the basic general rule of thumb is if you are, and I say this as a mixing and mastering engineer, if you are prepping your mixes to send out to have someone else master, you want to make sure that you're giving them something with like nominal headroom, right? So the whole thing is if you give somebody a maxed out, heavily limited mix, it's already, hands are very tied, and it's very finite in what they can really do. And just versus having open dynamics and being able to access all of that kind of stuff. So it's really, if you're not sure of how loud to make that, you can literally just take off your end result limiter that you've been using to make your song loud for your clients and just pull the volume down until clip lights are not going off. And send that. That is a fine rule. Absolutely.
Jeff Francis.
Well, Chris covered it all, except I would say speak to your mastering engineer. Ask them what they want. But they're going to tell you what Chris just said. Turn off any bus compression and don't clip.
Keep it in the lanes, guys. Next question.
From Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What are your experiences with round tripping? Do they always come with surprises? Or are many of the workflows established and stable?
Jeff Francis.
I'm assuming by round tripping you mean sending a session off to someone else and then getting it back. I think one of the biggest problems here is software compatibility and plugins. Whether you all have the same plugins, especially those third-party ones. Thankfully, now we have the ability to freeze tracks, and so you can send a session, and the other person doesn't have to have those particular plugins to hear the correct audio, but they can't also manipulate that. So again, this is a thing that's more about communication between people than it is about technical things. This is about talking and figuring that out ahead of time.
Last question.
Last one comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, and he says, at what point do you add fades to all your tracks to avoid clicks?
Jeff Francis.
Mickey and I were just having a lovely chat about this in the chat, and we're both of the old school world that everything is faded. Absolutely everything. Anytime a region hits another region that it did not come from the same exact audio, you need a crossfade. If that region goes to an end, a beginning or an end, you fade to or from black. Some software does have the ability to auto fade clips that don't have a fade on them, but I don't trust that.
Chris Gillette.
Yeah, absolutely. Any regions, I don't care what anyone else says, they must be crossfaded. This is how you get artifacts popping and clipping. But for me, as far as the overall cleanup, I kind of start at the beginning and do it throughout the mix process as I'm working. But I always know I'm going to do a final end pass at the very end when everything's done and make sure that every portion of everything is absolutely solid.
Courtney, you had a last comment or question?
Yeah, it's just, I was going to point out, the auto fade solves the problem of popping, which happens when you cut from one sound to another sound, and it's not at the zero crossing point of the waveform. And if good software will automatically, when you choose an edit point, it will wait till the next zero voltage crossing point of that sine wave before it really makes the edit.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I had a fabulous time today. I feel like I came away from this set far more than I came into it with, and that is always my end result. I hope all of you listening and watching this felt the same way. Our huge thanks to our producers, everybody who put the questions in, to the back-end crew who make sure this all goes out and works correctly. There's so much pre-show, during the show, post-show, all the organization of getting guests in and things like that. And today, particularly for our panelists who come here and voluntarily just give away this incredible information, hoping to help everybody get a little bit better at the work that they do and find better ways to produce things and to make it happen. Huge thank you to all of you on the panel today. Bringing your expertise here and sharing it is amazing. That's the end of today's show. We'll see you tomorrow. Oh, the clock traversal. Yes, 55,000 miles. That's 88,000 kilometers or 435 million bananas for scale. See you tomorrow. You guys did a fabulous job today. I really thought that was great.
Nice
Almost
job,
had to edit that in later.
yeah. Have to fly that in post. Yeah.
Davis messed up the close. Fix it.
The clock traversal was left out.
Well done.
Great job, everyone. That was fascinating.
Thank you all.
Awesome.
It's a fun day.
Dude, yeah, Jeff, really great, man.
I think this is a really good exemplar of, we dealt with a lot of basic stuff, but we did it in a way that was super engaging. So congratulations to all of you for your contributions. They were great.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for steering through questions and topics. That worked well.
That was fun. Yeah, I like that. I like that system. Alex had told me that try not to go more than 7 minutes without getting to the first question from the audience. And so